Welcome to Side Notes. I'm your host, Reginald Argue. I'm here with the Blair Packham, 1980s, the Jitters. 1981, Blair, you formed the group, the Jitters. 1986, you entered that Q107, and you also did a tour with Huey Lewis and the News. Can you talk a little bit about that time?
Well, yeah, we were together for a number of years before things started happening in a bigger way for us. We played around Toronto, all kinds of clubs in Toronto. We closed a number of clubs. We played clubs that have never been heard of since. And then it was actually around 1985 that things started happening for us. We had an opportunity, we entered the Q107 Homegrown Contest, local radio station that had this contest for homegrown talent. And then we did well in that. In the 1986 version of that, we placed. We were one of the top three. And from there, we got picked to open for Huey Lewis and the News, and then things just started rolling. But it took about 4 years or so for things to start picking up.
And during that time, I know 1983, you're working as a engineer for a mobile recording studio.
Yes.
And there's an interesting story, July 1983, which involves REM.
That's right. A band that my boss and I hadn't heard of. My boss, Doug McClement, who is a recording engineer of some note now, a very talented guy and a mentor of mine. He said, "Well, I have to be away in July, so can you take care of the business or the mobile portion anyway?" So I recorded this band that neither of us had heard of at a place called Larry's Hideaway, and the band was REM. And I had dinner with the band, and the band's manager was in the recording mobile with me to make sure I got the mix right and so forth. And I loved it. I loved the band. I loved everything about them. I loved the songs and the way they played them and so forth. They were great. I guess it was 2 or 3 years ago, that recording was released as part of a repackage that they did. I was uncredited, unfortunately, because I was just an anonymous recording engineer. They didn't have my name, but they released the recording. I was thrilled to see it out there, and I was thrilled to listen to it at home, and I thought I did a pretty good job.
And there's one song that the Jitters did, and it's called Never Gonna Be That Way Again. There's quoting a couple words from there. You're talking about losing your innocence and you can never get it back.
Yeah.
How did you come up with that line? And at the same time, can you share the line that I'm talking about?
Sure. And your innocence can only once be broken. It's never going to be that way again. Is that line anyway? It's a story song. I'll be honest with you. The guy who wrote that line was our producer, Jules Shear, who also co-wrote all those songs. Jules Shear was a hero of mine, songwriting hero, a guy that I really admired to this day. He's a very talented guy, and we had an opportunity to work with him for our second album, and so we co-wrote the songs. And he wrote more of some songs, and he wrote less of others, and we shared the songwriting.
And in 1988, Juno nominated you for the best upcoming new group.
That's right. Yeah.
And the question I have to ask you, 1981, you guys are formed, but 1988, you're getting recognized as a new group.
Well, I think that's the way the record industry works. Our first album didn't come out till 1987, so that was a 6-year period. Our first album came out on EMI Music of Canada, and so in 87 we did quite well. We got lots of radio play, sold a bunch of copies of our record, and so when the Junos came around in 1988, they nominated us as Best New Group. We didn't end up winning, which I guess is fitting since we'd been together at that point for 7 years.
And you also traveled with Heart over in the UK
Yes.
in 1988 too.
That's right. Yeah, that was 1988. Actually, we did a tour with Heart. We played all across the UK, but we ended up in London at Wembley Arena for 3 nights in a row, and we got a standing ovation on our third night, which is great.
And the question I have to ask you, I grew up in the west coast of Canada, so for me, the music scene was watching it through Much Music, and
Yes.
there was one of the late hosts there was Dan Gallagher, and you were on his show one time.
Yeah.
Can you share a little bit about him? I know he passed away in 2001.
Yeah, Dan was a lovely guy. He was a big man, and he was a great soul. I thought he loved music. He was very supportive of the Canadian music scene. He was a funny guy. I didn't know him that well, but we were on his show a couple of times, and he seemed like a great guy. Our experience with him was great. He encouraged us to play live, which he didn't do he didn't encourage that from other artists on the show, but we played live on his show just in a stripped down sort of way, just Matthew Greenberg and I, the bass player from the Jitters and I, and we had a great time.
And your one song, Last of the Red Hot Fools.
Mm-hmm.
I know that your first album and your second album combined sold, you're saying 80,000 copies.
Yeah, between the two of them, yeah, that's right. If I've said this before, our showing for the first album at 40,000 or so copies was pretty respectable, and we got lots of airplay. But the record company, quite rightly, I think, wanted to spend more money making the second record. They wanted to have a bigger name producer, and we made it in New York. They spent more money, and so when the second album sold about the same amount of copies, I think that was disappointing. Certainly was disappointing to me, but I mean, it's still, nowadays selling 40,000 copies of a record is pretty good.
Especially with the internet too.
Yeah.
There's a name, one of the producers out there is named Paul Gross.
Mm-hmm.
We're not talking the actor Paul Gross, but
No.
the engineer Paul
Yeah.
Gross.
Yeah.
He was involved with one of your projects too.
He was the guy who actually discovered us, for want of a better term. He was getting his hair cut, and the Q107 song came on the radio while he was getting his hair cut, and he said to the woman cutting his hair, "Oh, I like this. This is good. Who's this?" And she happened to know, so it was a lucky thing. She said, "Well, these are friends of mine. This is the band the Jitters," and she said, "You should get in touch with them." So he thought about it for a couple of days, and then he thought, "I'm going to," and he brought us into the studio. He was a studio owner. He owned a very famous studio in Toronto called Phase One, and so he brought us in on his own dime, just allowing us to record, and he sort of guided us through the process, and that ended up being our first album, the stuff we did with Paul.
In 1990, you're telling me that you actually won an award here in Toronto.
Yes.
And shortly after that, your band ends up breaking up.
Yeah, we somewhat ironically, kind of like the Juno Award, we were nominated for Best Rising Star at the Toronto Music Awards, and we won. Now at that point, we had been together for 9 years, and we'd already started talking vaguely about breaking up. So. We broke up about a year later, but it was ironic and kind of sad actually that we got our success later in our career, because we were, you start out with a lot of energy and a lot of creativity, and if that had been tapped into, I think things would have turned out a little differently. But instead, things happened more slowly. I mean, I'm glad things happened the way they did, but I'm just looking back. If you could change things, and you can't.
Sounds like a Cher song, If I Could Turn Back Time.
That's right. Yeah. That's right.
And another question I have to ask you is, right after you guys broke up, you started getting involved with writing theme songs for TV, for film. You've done CTV, Global, TSN, and the list goes on and on. Discovery Channel too. So. What are some of the projects that really stand out in your mind that you were involved with? I think Dawson Creek actually played one of your songs too during their soundtracks.
That actually was just a matter of a licensing thing. So they actually ended up using 3 of my songs in the series Dawson Creek. But the one that stands out for me the most would be the first one, which was for TSN. It was their NHL hockey series. I actually got a call the week that the Jitters broke up. I got a call from my friend who was writing for TSN, and he said, "Hey, TSN is looking for a new theme for their hockey show," and one of the groups that they mentioned, one of the sounds that they mentioned was the Jitters. They said, "Yeah, we want it to sound like so and so. Maybe the Jitters," was one of the examples. And my friend thought, "I know that guy," so he called me. So the week that the band broke up, I found myself going from being a guy in a band to being a guy who wrote music for TV, and that it turned into a real gig. And then I did countless themes for TSN over the next with my partner Bruce Fowler, who was my partner for all that TSN stuff. We did tons of stuff together, and it was great. But the first thing was the very first time I'd written something to picture. So there's an animation of a hockey puck rolling along an assembly line, and it suddenly explodes, and you have to have the music explode there too. I'd never done stuff like that. It was new.
And what were kind of some of the acts that you produced after you left the Jitters? I know that you were involved with Bryan Adams for a bit, and there was also Bo Diddley that you were involved with helping record.
Well, those actually happened before the Jitters got a record deal. That was during the early 80s. I recorded I recorded, as you mentioned before, REM live, but I also did Bryan Adams in the studio, just a demo. I did Bo Diddley. That was for he was a guest on a record by Paul James, a local guitar player who's fantastic guitar player, songwriter. But Paul made a record, and Bo Diddley was one of his guests, and that's because Paul had played with Bo Diddley, and so that was exciting. Wow, I recorded the cast of Beatlemania. That was very interesting because they all looked a lot like the Beatles, and they all kind of sounded like the Beatles, and so through their glass, you could see them it was kind of like recording the Beatles, sort of, almost, but not quite. That was an interesting experience. But most of my production stuff that happened after the Jitters broke up was Canadian indie people, like well, the woman who became my wife, Arlene Bishop, for instance. I did 3 albums with Arlene. Gee, it's hard to remember now. It's a long time ago. It's a long time ago, Reg.
Well, I do apologize about that, but taking a look, you also got involved with Bob Reid.
Yes.
And you were producer of the song Highway of Heroes.
Yeah.
What I want you to do is briefly talk about not only what your thoughts are on the Highway of Heroes, but how you got involved with the project.
Well, how I got involved is actually pretty simple. Bob very quickly became a good friend of mine. I met Bob as a guest on his radio show on News Talk 1010 here in Toronto.
And you're now co-host of that show.
Yeah, and I became co-host when his co-host left the show. Bob asked me, Bob and his former host asked if I would take over, and Bob and I became. He's easily one of my best friends. He's a great guy. And he's a songwriter. He, in addition to hosting radio stuff and doing other media work, he also writes songs. So he asked me if he wanted to make a recording. He was sort of shy about it. If he wanted to make a recording, would a guy like me be interested in helping him out? And and my answer always in that case is, let me hear the song, let me hear the music, and if I like it and I feel like I can contribute something, then yes. And I really liked the song a lot. I felt like I actually initially, when I first heard it, I had this feeling that I often have about songs. I wonder if you move this around or you change this or change that. I made those suggestions to Bob, and he took none of them. And the song is better for it. Once I heard the song, as soon as I heard it a couple more times, it became the way it is. It just became the way it had to be. And so we recorded it at a studio in the West End of Toronto, and had some great players on it. It's a success story as far as I'm concerned. It's a great song. It's a moving tribute to the people who honor the fallen soldiers from the armed forces by standing out on the bridges on Highway 401 on the Highway of Heroes. It's an excellent song.
And actually, there's one gentleman that's involved with it that actually is involved with you do a course every summer, songwriting. I think it's called Songwriters, and Rick Emmett
That's
from
right.
Triumph.
Yeah.
And he was involved with the Highway of Heroes project too.
He played an unbelievable solo that really just lifted the song into the stratosphere. Rick Emmett is one of my best friends as well. I have a lot of I don't have a lot of best friends, but I have a lot of great friends, and Rick is somebody I've known now for, 20 years. He and I have been running this songwriting workshop called Song Studio every summer for the last, it'll be 10 years this coming summer. So through me, Bob Reid met Rick, and then he said, "Hey, do you think we could ask Rick to play on the song?" And I asked Rick, and Rick said, "Sure, I'd love to." And he came up with this really rather incredible guitar solo on that song. He put a lot of work into it, but that's Rick. He works hard. He's a hard worker. So yeah, we work on this songwriting workshop every year, and we're coming up on our 10th anniversary. And Bob was part of the workshop as well. He was a student at the workshop because he's sort of a budding songwriter. And yeah, it's great to have all my friends around me.
What kind of artists did you actually have at your songwriting studio over the years?
Oh, everybody from Stephen Page from Bare Naked Ladies to Ron Sexsmith to Murray McLaughlin, Bruce Coburn, Ed Robertson from Bare Naked Ladies. Boy, the list goes on. Davenant Doyle, M. Griner, Shirley Icard, Mark Jordan. So many people over the years. The late Hayden Neal. It's an incredible list, really, and they're all contributing their time and their energy to help songwriters become better songwriters.
And you're also the vice president of the Canadian Songwriters Association.
I was, and that's actually how I met Rick Emmett. I've retired from the Songwriters Association of Canada, which is a very worthy organization. They're Canada's only national voice for songwriters. People often confuse them with SOCAN, but SOCAN isn't the same thing. SOCAN is a great body, but their work is mostly centers around licensing music and distributing royalties. Whereas the SAC, the Songwriters Association of Canada, is all about advocating on behalf of songwriters, creating a community, educating songwriters on how the business works, but also how to write better songs and so forth. It's a great organization. And I was vice president for a number of years, and for a while I was co-vice president with Rick Emmett. So that's how I met him.
And finally, do you have any words that you want to leave with people? Any inspirational words for up-and-coming singer-songwriters? Even leave your website too, just in case someone has some additional questions that they want to ask.
Sure, my out-of-date website. Well, I'll give my email address. That's probably better because my website is so out of date. First piece of advice: have an up-to-date website. My email address is blair@blairpackham.com. I'm easy to find, very easy to find. The advice I would give is give it your all, whatever you're doing. Oh, and for songwriters, don't be afraid to rewrite. Rewriting is essential. It's not essential in every single case for every single song. Some songs just flow out of you, and it's magic. But a lot of songs need to be reworked and rethought of, and newer songwriters resist this idea. Now, they wouldn't resist this idea if somebody invented a brand new braking system for a car and said, nope, that's the way it is. And people would say, but it doesn't work quite properly. It doesn't work when you're going over 40 kilometers an hour. Nope, not going to rethink it. I just like it the way it is. But I have songwriters who say that to me all the time, and I will say, but I'm not really getting your message in verse 2, or the bridge doesn't make sense to me. And they go, nope, not going to change it. And I think rewriting is a really important part of the creative process, no matter what you're creating. Whether it's an invention or a song or a movie or whatever, rewriting is really essential, the opportunity to go back. And in songwriting, you can always go back to your original. If you don't like the rewrite, just go back to the original. Nothing's changed. You can go back, but people resist, and I would say the advice is don't resist.
And are there any up-and-coming projects that you have that are going to be coming out that people can look forward to?
Well, I'm making a record of my own. I put out a couple of solo records. I say solo meaning post-Jitters, but I'm making another one of those, maybe 2 at once. I'm not sure. I've got about 7 or 8 songs that are mostly finished recording-wise, but as I write more, I want to include those ones. So I might end up with two albums. I'm not sure.
Well, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much.